All right.
Welcome to Ink and Flame. I'm your host, Tina Kutras, and today we're sitting down with Courtney Whims to talk about her Arterian series. Hi, Courtney. How are you?
I'm doing great. Tina, how are you?
I'm doing great too. Where are you coming to us from?
Well, so I'm in kind of like a little suburb off of Los Angeles, California.
Nice. I bet you have way better weather than me.
It's hit or miss. Sometimes it's like 90 degrees out, and then the next day it's like 60. So you never know what you're going to
Oh,
get.
really?
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
California gets like spring?
It does, surprisingly. Yeah. And we get a lot of like June gloom. So June is usually like our very gloomy month. So I like it though. I prefer it to like 100-degree sunny weather. Like I'll take the gloom all day.
Really? So I guess that's a different in perspective. I'm in Canada, like Nova Scotia, Canada. So we get soaked through April, May, and June.
There you go.
But we got some warm days coming. So anyway, let's talk about books, shall we?
All right, I'm in for it. Let's do it.
So what inspired you to create the world of the Arterian series?
So I actually had come off of reading the Fourth Wing series, so back January of last year in 2024, and I had finished Iron Flame, and I was like, oh man, like I had always loved dragons as a kid. Like I loved the whole like Aragon series. And so after finishing Iron Flame, I was like, oh, I want to find like more Dragon Rider Romantasy series. And so I kept looking for them and I found like a lot of dragon shifter stuff, but I was like, no, I want like the bonded Dragon Rider where the dragons are talking and stuff. And I was like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if it had this and this and this? And I kind of somehow spiraled from like looking for a book to kind of like writing my own. And so here I am like a year and a half later.
That's a pretty quick process. Like really, a year and a half is pretty awesome.
Quick. I'm a pretty quick drafter. So like my first draft of book one, and it was not readable by any means. It was terrible. Nobody will ever see that draft. But the first draft I wrote about like 95,000 words in about 5 weeks. So I'm a pretty fast
Wow.
typer. And yeah, like once I get going, if I'm like in the groove, like I can get a lot of words down.
That'll make a lot of people happy because, nobody likes to wait for sequels.
Yeah, and that's why the second one's coming out soon. But it does get tricky though, because I do work full time as well. So I'm trying to balance, full time family with a toddler and then on top of like writing stuff. So
Yeah, exactly. And I do remember reading some of your Goodreads reviews that one of the people had said that it's the perfect book to pick up after you put down Rebecca Yarros.
which is such a compliment to me because I'm like, wow, that's just I've had a lot of people tell me like, oh man, this has gotten me out of like my Iron Flame or my Onyx Storm slump. And like that's just like so much praise. Like I'm always so flattered when people say that because I'm like, that's ultimately like my pipeline of how I got here. Is I read Iron Flame and I was like, I want something, with that same kind of feel, while also being like its own story. And so anytime someone says that, I'm super flattered.
That's awesome. It means you hit the target, right?
Yeah. So
Has your journey as an author evolved from the writing of Flames and Fallacies to the writing of The Blood and Veins?
yeah. And I mean, I think as an author, or at least from my experience, I feel like the more you write, the more things you learn about yourself, whether like your strengths or your weaknesses. And so again, I hopefully I'm not shooting myself in the foot by saying this, but I feel like your first of anything is never going to be your best, right? And for book one, for me specifically, it's almost kind of a setup for the rest of the world. So you don't really know all the magic system yet, the politics. You're just kind of more getting like introduced to the characters and the drama and like building it up for book two.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the length of the series. Do you have a goal of how long the series is?
So it's for sure going to be a planned trilogy. However, I plan on having other books and other characters' point of views in the same world. So that's all I can say for now. Yeah.
I love it when writers do that because it sets you up to, kind of scratch an itch. When you put the book down, you know that it's not over.
Yeah. Well, and like as when book two comes out, it really expands on the world. And I think as people read book two, they'll be able to see like, I wonder if she's going to write a story from like this. I'm like trying to be super vague.
That's what you're supposed
I
to
can
do.
see, I know, I'm like, it's probably a good thing I'm not traditionally published and have, like PR or someone telling me like, hey, you can't say that. Like, be careful what you say. Cause I'm just my own PR publisher person. Yeah. So I think as people read book two, they might be able to see like opportunities of like, I wonder if she can write a series off of like this specific segment in book two. So hopefully
Yeah,
that makes sense. Hopefully, like whenever people read book two and they come back to this, they're gonna be like, oh, I see what you're saying there. So
she was dropping some breadcrumbs there. So, what would you consider to have been the most rewarding part of writing this series so far?
oh man. I mean, I feel so grateful for how far this book has gone. Everything from bookstores like putting my book on shelves or having me come in for signings to readers DMing me and just saying how much they love the story like that. Just it absolutely makes my day knowing people, one, gave the book a chance, and two, like enjoyed it enough to say, hey, I haven't been able to stop thinking about this, or this is like my new favorite book. So yeah, there's a lot of little tidbits here and there throughout like the whole journey that have been like the best part of this journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. If you could give one piece of advice to any aspiring fantasy author, what would it be?
Man, this would go to just any author. I feel like you just have to write the book. A lot of people are like, what's your number one tip? And I would just say, write the book. Like, and everybody's first draft is never going to be their best. And this is a very, very common saying with authors is like, you can't edit a blank page. So just write, just get the book down. Even if you don't know like the full plot or the full story, like some people are plotters and some people are pantsers, like you just got to start and just like push through it and get it down on paper because that's not always going to be your final story either. Like it'll change as you do more edits and like things will just kind of evolve from there. So yeah, just write the book.
That's awesome. And I remember seeing a post on social. I'm not sure who shared it, but it was like a segment of somebody's first draft. It says add witty banter here in quotations. And like it's all like laid out as if to I'm not gonna flesh this part out right now. I'm just gonna tell myself to do it later. You know what I
I was
mean?
going to say, I actually have, when I wrote this book, okay, the first draft, I printed it out. This is my first draft. I'm going to hold it back here so nobody can ever zoom in. But like,
I don't think we could
yeah,
anyway.
but I mean, like, I have like asterisks where it's like, put a transition right here, or I'll put like a bunch of X's for, I don't know what this character's name is going to be, but here's what they say. So, but I do have my first draft printed and it's right under my desk where nobody will ever see it. But sometimes when I want a good giggle, I'll go back and read it.
That's hilarious. And I love that. And I totally agree because names I find I'm also writing and I find that names as one of the most challenging parts. Like
Oh, man.
it's,
Yeah.
it's hard because my sister complains all the time about like, how do I pronounce this? Because if you're not used to that, it's sometimes challenging. But anyway, I
Yeah.
think it's funny.
Well, you can always do a pronunciation guide in the front. So I know plenty of people that do that. And so that really helped me
Yeah.
when I was a reader is seeing those pronunciation guides to figure out how to say
Yeah,
people's
exactly.
names.
And she loves those too. I think the one for When the Moon Hatched was her favorite because like it didn't just do the pronunciation guide, it also did like
The
everything you need
glossary.
to know about this world.
Yeah.
How do you balance writing intricate fantasy worlds with relatable human emotions?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's kind of different because when with book one, what I really wanted to do was start the story where you're kind of learning the world building through Kat because Kat kind of comes into the story. She doesn't really know a lot. And so you learn a lot of like the magic systems and the politics and stuff like that alongside her. Book two is where a lot of that world building like comes to the pages. And so I tend to kind of focus more, especially on book one, more on like the characters themselves and the world building aspect. But I think it's good to have both, especially if you're writing a fantasy or a fantasy romance series. But for me, kind of keeping like the characters themselves at the forefront.
Yeah. So the world of the Arterian is very richly imagined. Like you have a lot of detail. What was your process for building its lore, the geography, and the magic system?
Man, I spent so much time just looking up like creating the magic system to like the lands and everything. I also do like my own maps. And so like I would sketch out, I mean, I have lists of different like town names I would do. as well as like sketches of like the maps themselves before I like fleshed them out. And so I guess there's like no easy answer to it because it's a long process. And even with book two, I'm still kind of learning new pieces as I go.
Yeah. How do you approach creating a fantasy world that feels so immersive?
I think it would also lean into like how cats kind of learning. So I think some books I have read in the past, it gets almost kind of like overwhelming if everything's kind of introduced at the same time. And so what I really wanted to do with book one is kind of take you step by step and you're learning in different scenarios, different like parts of the world. So that way it's kind of like a slow introduction. And then that way it's a little bit more immersive that way as well.
Yeah, then are there a lot of real world cultures, myths, or any histories that influenced some of the things that happen in your storyline?
I love this question. With book one, I would say not as much, but book two, the magic system is based off of a real life myth. And I can't expand on it quite yet since book two isn't out. But yeah.
That's a bit of a teaser, isn't it? So, what role does the conflict play in shaping the world and the characters in the series?
So the conflict in this one's pretty big. So, Cat or FMC lives in a world where all the dragon riders have been executed and all the dragons are illegal. And so, lo and behold, early on in book one, she finds a dragon egg buried in her father's grave. And so, her entire life, she kind of grows up thinking that, like, rebels, ones that kind of sympathize with dragons are bad, and dragons in general are these dangerous, menacing creatures. And so, a lot of the conflict in book one is like Kat kind of breaking down like that assumption and fallacy, which is why how I got of Flames and Fallacies, is taking that fallacy about dragons and them being bad and kind of reconstructing her view and opinion of dragons. So that's kind of like the main conflict in book one. And then trying to find out who she can trust, whether it's an ex lover or new friends or a potential new love interest. And ultimately, making the decision that dragons aren't that bad. And so that's kind of like the storyline of book one.
Wicked. And it sounds like it was a lot of fun. Like when I listen to you talk and I watch your energy, it seems like you really had fun writing this.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I even get into some instances if I'm really, really excited about a scene, I feel like my fingers are on fire and I just like can't stop typing. And it'll get to a point where I'll tell my husband like, "Hey, I just need like 30 minutes to write this down and get it out of my brain real quick." And then all of a sudden it's 3 hours later and it's 1 a.m. and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I need to, I need to go to sleep because I work tomorrow or something." So yeah, and I've had a lot of instances like that with book two, which is why book one is about 110,000 words, and book two, I'm getting towards the tail end of edits. Book two is at about 180,000 words.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
pretty
so
epic.
it's a thicker book two is a thicker book, but yeah.
Nice. So for perspective, that's probably around 800 pages, maybe even. Is that about
Depending on the
right?
formatting. So book one is a 6x9 book, and I'll end up doing a 6x9 for the second book, so it matches. Depending on the formatting, yeah, probably about around there.
So I talked to my sister because she's always picking up on my time frames, like how much do you have done and blah, blah, blah. And when I speak in terms of how many words, she's always like, how many pages is that?
I did the
So I
same
guess,
thing before I was an author. I'm like, I don't know what that number is supposed
yeah,
to mean. But now I understand it as an author. But most people are like, yeah, I don't.
that's how we measure it.
Yeah.
So how do you feel your world building enhances your story without actually overshadowing it? Do you feel that you've managed to do that world building successfully?
Yeah, I would say so, especially like I said in book one, I just tried to kind of introduce it at a slower pace. And I also try to use that world building to highlight like Kat's internal conflict. Again, she kind of like grows up thinking all these different things about rebels being bad and like dragons being bad. And just like throughout, she has this sort of transition where she starts to break down those ideas and kind of retransform them. And so the world building really helps to kind of solidify like what she starts off believing, like her misbeliefs about things, and then where she ends up towards the end of the book.
For sure. Like I like to think of it like when you really look at, we'll say even like in our own timeline, when people lived back in the day, there was no form of, knowledge of what lay beyond the bend, right? So
Mhm.
it's interesting to think from a world building perspective that you have to throw all this at somebody. But at the same time, when you really think about it, these people, they lived in their village and they likely never stepped beyond it, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I love it when stories really grasp that and it goes with the character as they're growing because there's no way they could know better, right?
Right. And that's exactly how my FMC is. She kind of starts out pretty naive. She has a lot of self-doubt, so she kind of grows up and it's only her and her mother has like a mental illness. And so she kind of spends a lot of her childhood growing up taking care of her mother. And so she never has an opportunity to leave the town that she's in. And partway through book one, you'll see instances where she had been considering taking her mother and trying to like move across this realm to find a cure for her, but she doesn't get to do that. And so all she knows is like and the neighboring city. And other than that, like she doesn't know a lot. And again, that's where the world building comes in. As she starts to learn, you're starting to learn with her like more and more about the world and the people around her.
That's perfect. So the characters in the Arterian series are complex and very dynamic. How do you approach building up their personalities and their arc?
I always like to introduce a lot of conflict between different characters. So whether that's internal or external, because I don't know, I'm a sucker for conflict. I'm a sucker for tension. And I'm also a sucker for any time where you're questioning, like, okay, is this person a good person or a bad person? Like, I don't know what's happening here. And so, yeah, with every character, I had to kind of really sit down and think of like, okay, what's the number one thing that's important to them? And then also like, what's a lie that they believe? And what are their I want to say they're cons, but what are their flaws? Because I think if you make characters too perfect, it doesn't feel realistic, and it also doesn't tend to contribute to conflict and tension because it's not realistic. Like nobody is perfect, everybody has flaws, and so it's fun to see how people can come together or characters can come together in a story regardless of those flaws. So
Yeah, I really like that. That caught me off guard that you said
thanks.
you like to say what is something that they believe in that's wrong or however you worded it. I'm sorry, but
No,
I think
no,
that's
you're good.
a great way to, you know, create this tension because, if you believe in something, everybody believes in something wholeheartedly. We can get a little adamant sometimes and try and convince people of things. So I love that that's kind of a mechanism for conflict.
Thanks. And it's actually not even mine, so I will not take any credit from it. There's a gal on she has like writing kind of sort of videos on YouTube where she talks about like kind of creating a very realistic character. And she just talks about like when you're thinking about your character, especially your main character, like if you're writing a single POV from your character, like you kind of have to know the ins and outs of like them as a person. And so like you should start off with what do they want the most? And then again, what's a lie that they believe? Because like over that story, you should be trying to show them the lie that they believe is wrong and having that full character arc, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
So, do you have a favorite character in the series?
They're all my favorite characters. I really do like writing all of them. Even some of the people, how do I say this? Even some of the negative characters. No, I don't want to say negative characters. Even some of the characters that you might not like, I still like to write. Because I think there's always going to be a little kernel, like at least in my books, like there's always going to be a little bit of a kernel of good in them. Like there's always going to be something that makes them human. Nobody's ever going to be 100% evil. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's fair. How do you handle writing the morally ambiguous characters or the deeply flawed ones? You just mentioned, you alluded to the not everybody is, I mean, no one is perfectly evil.
Yeah.
So, how do you handle writing that morally complex and ambiguous character?
So I'm like trying to tread carefully because I don't want to spoil anything. But like, I think it's really important for any sort of like villain in a story. it's important to know why they act or they think that way. Like they shouldn't just be necessarily evil just because they're evil. Like they could be evil for multiple different things. Maybe they have a twisted view. Maybe they have like a revenge thing where they want to get revenge for something. Maybe they're going about a twisted way of trying to save a loved one, or maybe they're power hungry or they're greedy or something. Like it should have some reason why a character is quote unquote like evil. And so I try to look at it that way. I try to really come up with an idea of like, why are they doing the things that they're doing? And I really try to twist it hard enough for like, to put them in a really hard scenario to where like, if you as a person, if you were in this situation, you could see why they would make that wrong decision because I don't want to say it's a human way of making like an evil decision, if that makes sense. And again,
Yeah.
I'm hoping this isn't too vague because this is something that comes up in book two that you'll find out. But overall, I just try to make my villains have a realistic reason of why they do the things that they do.
Yeah, that they're justified in their own minds of their
Yeah,
actions.
exactly.
So, were there any characters in the series that surprised you as you wrote them? Did
I
any
would
of them come to life in a way that you weren't anticipating?
I feel like Deja, who's the main dragon character, she's based off of like my dog in real life. And she's pretty similar to my dog in real life and like my experiences with her. However, she ended up being a little more sassy than my dog. Like she's kind of a little bit more of a spitfire. Like my dog in real life, she is really cute and adorable, which is what Deja's like in the early book. And my dog is, I don't want to say she's sassy. She's just very, especially now that she's an older dog, she's almost kind of like grumpy in a sense. And so like Deja the dragon character has a little bit more sass and a little bit more, let's say, sorry, I'm trying to
She's
think of the word.
particular.
She's part, yes. And she's very assertive. I feel like Deja can be very assertive. Like she's not afraid to stand her ground. My dog, on the other hand, is like, her bark is bad, but she won't bite you. So Deja, on the other hand, will bite you. So yeah.
I love that name. That's a cool name.
Thank you.
So you're a mom, you work full time, and you're a wife. So what does a typical writing day look like for you?
Man, I actually really don't get any writing done because again, like I have a pretty full day between like a full-time job and like my family and trying to, be there for like my husband and my toddler. I normally don't get to start writing until like during the weekdays till about like 9 or 10, depending on when I can get my daughter down to about like 1 a.m. Sometimes if I'm getting crazy, it'll be 2 a.m. But those are kind of like my main times that I write. And then on the weekends, if we don't have plans like birthday parties or camping trips or something, I'll kind of coordinate with my husband sometimes and maybe I'll have like a 10-hour break on the weekend where I could just like write it all out. But normally it's at night, like after 10 p.m.
I love that you're able to be a night owl because I am the early bird. There's days where my eyes pop open at like 4:45 or 5 o'clock in the
Oh,
morning and I'm like,
wow.
yay, an extra 20 minutes of writing.
I wish I could be like that. I wish I could. I've always been kind of a night owl though. Look, I am most creative at night. It just comes back to bite me when I have to get up early for work the next
Yeah.
day, or if my daughter gets up at like 6 a.m., that's where I get in
Well,
trouble.
that's okay. I think most of your readers can relate to the just one more chapter late at night concept. So you're writing it, they're
Exactly.
reading it.
I am saying one more chapter, but I'm just writing it instead of reading it.
Yeah, exactly. So we were talking earlier about the pantser versus plotter. Where would you put yourself on that?
I'm probably like, I'm probably like 75% plotter with like a
Yeah.
25% pantser. And so what that usually looks like for me is I mean I've had basically the entire arc for the series done before I started the first draft of the first book. But there are like big pivotal scenes. I'm like, okay, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. But sometimes I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen between A and B, but we're gonna figure it out as we get there. So but most of it is plotted out.
Cool. And do you ever kind of growl when you write this most epic scene and then you have to bring it back down a little and that
Figure
lull
out
in between?
Oh yeah, or
Yeah.
figure out where to do it. Oh man, I do that all the time. Sometimes I'll just sit there and I'll stare at a wall. I'm like, how am I going to get this to connect? how am I gonna and sometimes I know a lot of authors, like, you get attached to a scene. You're like, I have this scene in my head, like, I don't want to let it go. But then sometimes it's like, you kind of have to break it and like reform it a little bit, and maybe you'll get kind of that original essence in it, but it makes the story flow better. So
Yeah.
yeah, it gets tricky sometimes, and I'm a big violator of this. I am not a person that writes chronologically. I will not write beginning to end of a book. I can already see your face. What
Yeah.
I do is I'm like,
I'm like, what?
so, and this is my process where I need to do better for the next books. And I said I was going to do it differently for book two, and I didn't. I did the same thing I did with book one. But anyways, a lot of people say they're mood readers. I'm a mood writer. Like, if I'm like, all right, I'm feeling a sad scene, like someone's gonna die today, like I have to write that scene out. And before I write the first draft of a book, I have a document where I have all these scenes, and I have them categorized by, like, sad scene, action scene, romantic scene. And then what I do is I take those scenes. I'm like, okay, like this should probably go, 25% of the way through the book, and this one should go over here. And then I'll start to try to like connect all of them. And then once I have them connected, I'll kind of read it from front to back and just kind of start combing through it that way. Ends up, I end up having several more drafts that way because I'm not writing chronologically. And sometimes I'll get through and I'm like, wait, this doesn't make sense over here. And it's probably because I didn't write it chronologically, but I eventually figure it out. It just takes me a few drafts.
That's awesome though. Like that's when you really have the ending figured out. When you can do that, that's amazing.
It's a
I
lot of work,
personally think.
but
Yeah, for sure. So how did you approach writing the series? So you said you've got the entire series in your mind already. So is there like a master document that has all of the series laid out in sort of that kind of way, and you're just plucking it into book after book?
yeah, I did have a document before I started book two. I had a document of like, hey, here's what's going to happen in book two. Here's what's going to happen in book three. And then I also have like little note cards, like color coded note cards for like book two and then book three. And then so I could see everything from like the beginning of the series to the end of the series. And so I know how the series ends. So it always cracks me up when people are like, hey, so who is she going to end up with? Because there's a love triangle in my book. Who's she going to end up with? Like, have you decided? I'm like, yeah, I know who she ends up with. I know the ending. Yeah.
I'm not telling.
But I can't tell you. You'll just have to read and find out. So,
That's awesome. So what did you find was the hardest part of the writing process for you, and how did you overcome it?
oh man, the hardest part, I would probably say going from a blank page to a first draft. It is just so intimidating when you just see like when you just see a blank document. You're like, I got a lot to go. Or like you only have like the first chapter and you're like, okay, well, I got chapter one down. Now I got like, 40 or 50 more to go. So I would definitely say the first is always the hardest because you're basically starting from scratch. And if you are doing that coming off of a book you've already, like, it's not your first book, right? You've already gone through that whole process and you're ending off on a polished, finished book, and then you start from scratch again. And so I would say that's probably the hardest part of the process is when you're like, I got to start over. I got to do this again. Here we go. So it's
Yeah.
also fun though. I
You're
like the
like
challenge.
page
So
500 and the end and page one. Ah, crap.
exactly, exactly. So it's fun though. I find I like challenges like that. Once I start, once I get over like my hesitations and I start getting into it, I really start to like get in the flow of things. I think just mentally it gets a little tricky sometimes because the mental game as an author is probably one of the hardest parts in my opinion. So
Yes, exactly. So your child is in bed, everybody's left you alone, and now you get to sit in front of your computer. What's your ritual? What do you do?
So I normally listen to music. I know some authors don't, but I do. I actually I mean, I have like a playlist on Spotify for my book. It originally was just for book one, but there are songs on there for book two. So I used to like filter through that all the time while I was writing. Now I've found YouTube playlists where it's like fantasy playlists, and it has no singing. It's just like harps or like fiddles and stuff like that. And depending on like what scene I'm writing, I'll put that on. Um, and and I'll put my
That's what I
headphones
do.
in. Yeah, yeah. I'm like, I can't do complete silence. I don't know why. And anytime I'm working on anything, I'm like, I have to be listening. Like, my husband makes fun of me because I'll even like go take a shower and I have to have music playing. I don't know. It's just, I really love music, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that's always part of my process of when I start writing.
And do you grab a coffee at that hour?
Um, Oh, I'll usually have like water or something like that. I'm the kind of person that I can't have coffee after like 4, otherwise I won't sleep, which is funny because I don't really sleep till 1 or 2 a.m. anyways. But yeah, I'm usually like I'll have water. If I'm feeling a little daring, sometimes I'll have a glass of red wine or like a old fashioned or something like that. But normally it's just like
Yeah.
water and pop my headphones in with some music and then I just get into it. So
Nice.
yeah.
So the Arterian series explores themes of power and loyalty, identity. What drew you to those themes?
Think especially with like identity, that was a really, really important one to me because Kat, let me back up. A lot of authors will put parts of themselves in their characters, whether they mean to or not. And so one big thing that Kat struggles with is her self-doubt. Like she really struggles with that. And she's a very anxious person. I'm also a very anxious person with a lot of self-doubt. And so throughout this whole series, what I have planned for her is like a character arc of her kind of like coming into her own and starting to believe and trust more into herself. And so I would say identity is probably hands down like the most important part of this entire series is just her growing into her own.
Nice. And are there any other characters that have any kind of muses in your life?
I think so. There's two MMCs because this is a love triangle, right? And you mean like who in my real life has inspired these characters, right? That's my muse.
Yes. Yeah.
I would definitely say there are bits of my husband in the two MMCs. Like there's certain like aspects of it that way. And then there's also certain pieces throughout like the books that might have been plucked from my real life. So for example, towards the end of book 1, there's a speak of guardian angels. That was like a conversation I've had with my little sister or Archie, for example. He's a very sunshiny character. He's a side character and he was really influenced off of one of my guy best friends when I was in high school. And so and then, sorry, one other one is Marge. She was also inspired by when I was in college. I worked at like my very first job, and there was a woman I worked with, and she was very grumpy and standoffish. And I was like so intimidated by her. Like I honestly didn't really like her because I just felt like she was not very nice. And then over time, as I like got to work more and more with her, like she became one of my favorite people and we still talk to this day. And so I would say she also really inspired Marge. So a lot of different people have
Nice.
inspired my characters.
And does she know that she was an inspiration? Has she read
No,
your book?
I need to. She hasn't. She hasn't. She talked about wanting to, but I do want to tell her, which is
Maybe
funny
tell her
because a
just in
lot of
case she decides to listen to the podcast.
I'll tell her before. So
Yeah. That's awesome. So, how do you weave deeper themes into your stories without overwhelming the plot? So, you've got some pretty intense stuff in there. So, like a love triangle is pretty significant, I think. How do you manage that?
which is funny because a lot of people don't like love triangles. So, and they're like, yeah. Although I have had a lot of people say I don't normally like love triangles, and I really, really love the love triangle in your book. I'm like, okay, that's a big compliment. If you don't normally like it and you liked it in my book, like that's great. But again, I personally think on layering a lot of the characters and the storytelling, I try not to have too many back to back scenes. Like I try to kind of almost think about it as like a roller coaster, if that makes sense. Like there's a lot of ups and
Yeah.
downs. And so that's
Yeah.
the kind of approach I try to take when it comes to, themes like that.
Yeah. So, what do you hope readers will take away from your series?
Well, aside from, I hope they have a really good time. I hope they really kind of see the truth and like Kat struggles of struggling with a lot of self doubt and like really seeing that they're capable of anything that they put their mind to, because that's ultimately kind of the message I want to tell throughout the story.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe see themselves a little bit in that they can surpass whatever they're experiencing when it comes to self doubt.
exactly. And like throughout book one, that's also in book two as well, I tried to introduce like grounding techniques because, like I said earlier, Kat has a lot of anxiety, and I struggled a lot with anxiety when I first wrote this book. I had a lot of postpartum anxiety. And so, one of the techniques I had learned from a therapist is like a grounding technique. And I ended up writing that into the book, and that was really important. I'm like, if nobody takes anything from that, hopefully they learn a grounding technique if they struggle with anxiety, and that could kind of help them in their everyday life. So I did have
Yeah, that's
someone,
beautiful.
yeah, and I did have someone tell me like, oh man, this is my new favorite grounding technique. I've never heard of this. I'm like, oh great, I'm so glad like someone, was able to see that and notice that and like take that into their everyday life. So
Yeah, so it's already happened for you. That's
yeah,
wicked.
so I was like, yeah, getting all emotional. I was like, oh my gosh, someone like noticed, and like, that's great.
So you also do a little bit of a balancing act, like you said, with the roller coaster between lighthearted moments and darker moments for some of the emotional scenes in your writing as well.
And I think you really can't, this is going to sound like I'm not trying to be super poetic here, but you really can't see the light without the darkness. I think they both have to be kind of balanced in that aspect. And so I wanted to make sure I had both sides in not only book one, but the entire series. So you'll see some funny moments, some moments that make you, I've had people say, like, oh, yeah, I like laughed out loud. And my kids were like, what's so funny? Why are you laughing? They had to be like, oh, it was just something funny in the book versus moments that are going to make you cry or sob and shut the book and like have to have a second to collect yourself. So I think it's important to have both because ultimately that's what life is, right? Like life isn't always rainbows and butterflies and it also isn't always dark.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a balance there and that kind of really makes you appreciate the lighter good times, right? So and not
Yeah,
take them for
exactly.
granted, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. So if you could live in the world that you've created for a day, what would you do first? I think I can
Man.
guess the answer to this question.
Okay, wait, I'm curious. What are you going to say? What are you going to say?
I would guess that if you've loved dragons all your life, you're going for a flight. But let's hear
That's
what you have to
exact.
say.
Nope, that's exactly what I was gonna say. So like, it's funny because like when I was writing book two, okay, I was like, I need to make sure because a lot of the dragon writing shows up in book two, like Kat and Deja do that a lot, and so I was like, I need to make sure this is realistic. Like, I wanna like feel like I'm writing a dragon, and so I went to Six Flags. We live like close to a Six Flags, and they have they have all sorts of roller coasters there, but one of them is called Tatsu. It's actually like supposed to be like this dragon ride or whatever, and they strap you in and you just like fly, and it's going really fast and doing these like curves and spins and like loops or whatever. And so I got off of that and I was like in my phone notes of like taking like note of all the things I felt and like different maneuvers and stuff like that. So hands down would be dragon riding would easily be like what I would need to do if I was ever in my stories.
Such a cool way to get prepared for it. I would end up sick, guaranteed, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be it might be a little overwhelming, but I'm like, let's do it. I love roller coasters and things like that. I went skydiving actually a few years ago. I think that's where I also got a lot of so I'm like dragon riding for sure.
A little wild streak in you, I would say.
I probably wouldn't go skydiving again, but I did do it.
That is so cool. When I was young, I wanted to do it, but I definitely don't want to do it now.
Now that I
So good
have
for
now
you
that I
for
have a
getting it off the
daughter too,
list.
I'm like, yeah, now that I have a daughter too, I didn't have any kids or anything then. So I was like, well,
Yeah.
the parachute fails, then it's fine.
So, what's a book or an author that has been a major influence for you? I guess, well, you had mentioned that you had just finished Rebecca Yarrow's The Fire and Flame, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Rebecca Yarros would for sure be like my number one answer because if I hadn't had read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, I don't think I would have wrote this book. I had never planned on being an author. I did a lot of writing when I was growing up. Like I would write these stories probably from like elementary school up to like college, but I never thought
Hmm.
I don't know. I never thought I was going to be able to write a book. I was like, I don't have the credentials for that. And who am I? Like, who's going to read my book? Like, I'm never going to be an author. And now it's weird because I'm like, whoa,
Thousands of
here.
people.
And now I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm like, what? I've had people in real life tell me, like, oh my gosh, my friend read your book. And when they said it was by Courtney Whims, I was like, wait, what? I know Courtney Whims. Did you write a book? And I'm like, yeah, like, so it's so wild because I'm like, I just feel so grateful because I never would have imagined this. And even when I wrote it last year, I was like, okay, maybe 100 people will read it in the first 5 years or something like that. And it's really taken off, and it's been such a joy and just such an honor that that I am where I am today. So
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So aside from Rebecca Yarros, like, are you reading anything these days?
it is hard being an author because it's so hard to find time to read. And for me personally, it's a struggle because like if I'm not writing, I'm doing my own like I do all my own covers. So everything from like the details and like the frame hand drawn, like nothing stock, nothing's AI. Like I've done everything. So like if I'm not writing, I'm working on the book cover, I'm working on the map, I'm doing like character art and stuff like that. So I keep saying, I'm like, okay, when I get this next book done, I'm going to take off like 2 months and I'm going to read all these books. So I haven't read anything recently. I have all these things and I go to the bookstores and I'm like, oh, I like that. Like I got Shield of Sparrows 2 weeks ago. I'm like, you look at all these other books that you have to read. Why did you get that? I'm like, well, the cover was really pretty, let me tell you. And I've seen it all over like book talk books. So like based off of
Um,
all these books, like I will have a busy 2 months if I do take those 2 months off, but we'll see if
I'm
it actually
laughing this hard.
happens.
I'm laughing this hard because I said the exact same thing to my sister yesterday. When I'm done this book, I'm taking a week off and I'm reading books.
Yeah,
You
it's
just
just
don't have
never.
the headspace for it, right?
Well, and I'm like, I said I was going to take a break off between book one and book two, but I was like, I have to write book two. And it wasn't even like an obligation thing. I was just so excited to write book two. I'm like, you guys, like look, if book one was a 5 star, like book two is like a 7 star. Like I am just so excited about book two. And I can't wait for people to read it. And so that's why I didn't really take a break between one and two. I was like, I have to get this out. I have to get this out. But
So
maybe
is
after
book
book
one a
two.
cliffhanger?
Yeah, it's a cliffhanger. Some people
But
will come in my
I
DMs and be
haven't.
like, I'm so mad at you. So I love you. And I'm like, so I haven't had
You know,
anyone.
you've done it when. So I do hear that maybe your book two is coming out maybe a little sooner than planned.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's coming out December. And I'm like, no, it's gonna come out sooner than that. I had to put December on Amazon just because, let me back up. Last year when I had book one, it was originally supposed to launch in September and I got picked up by a literary agent. And so when I got picked up by my literary agent, she was like, hey, you can't release the book. And she was going to have me cancel all my pre-orders and stuff like that. And in order to go on submission to traditional publishers. And so I did pull the release date. I did fulfill the pre-orders, which were, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it from here, but I did first edition paperback and hardcovers of the book, and it's kind of like the OG story. So the story in the first edition isn't the same as the current one. But long story short, I had to pull the release date on that. And then I didn't have a date for the longest time for months because we were supposed to go out on submission to traditional publishers. And so this time around, I was like, okay, I'm going to open up pre-orders. I'm going to say, put the latest like month in 2025 and say December. But in the back of my head, I'm going to have it done much sooner. And I'm not going to announce that sooner date until the book is essentially done. So that way I won't be pushing back release dates. If anything, I'll be pushing it up because I don't want to do what happened last year, which was get everyone pumped for a release date. And then all of a sudden it's not happening. And then everything kind of falls quiet for a few months. So it will be coming out sooner
Yeah.
than December. It'll be coming out in September instead.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
Congratulations.
thank you.
So what's your favorite way to celebrate finishing the book? So you're on book two. What's your
Mhm.
favorite method of celebrating?
There's like so many ways I would love to celebrate. I'm a big foodie person. I'm like, if I can go out to dinner, like that'd be great. Like give me some sushi or some Mexican or something like that. I'll have a margarita. Like I'm pretty simple that way. I'd like to think I would be able to just maybe even like go on a trip. I don't know if that's going to happen this time around, or even just read, like we talked about, just being able to like read something, take my mind out of like my world and my series and just like escape a little bit into somebody else's. So, which I think that's going to be my goal after I finish this second book. Maybe I'll go out to eat and I'll come home and instead of working on book stuff, I'm just going to read. So we'll see how it goes
For
though.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, what's the best way for readers to get in touch with you?
So I'm mostly active on Instagram. So I would say Instagram first and foremost. I do have a TikTok as well as Threads. And then I have my own website where you can sign up for my newsletter for any sort of important information. So for example, I'll be sending out pre-orders that way, as well as ARC signups, and any sort of other like bonus information, whether it's the update on the audiobook, special editions, and sometimes I'll also have bonus chapters. So the newsletter I would probably say is the number one way to stay up to date on any sort of information. But if you're trying to like reach out and talk to me, Instagram is usually like the best place too.
Nice. And do you have an audiobook for the first one?
So it's in the works. I'm hoping to have it done by the end of this year. We already have the female narrator, which I'm really excited about. Like she's incredible. And then I have one male narrator also down, and I'm excited to work with him because I've been talking to him since last year when I got the book done. And then I'm looking to
Nice.
get a second male narrator because again, there's two MMCs. So I want
Right.
one male narrator for one of the guys and then another male narrator for the other one. So hopefully
Perfect.
that comes out later this year.
That's awesome. And you have the book close at hand so we can have a look at that beautiful cover that you designed one more time.
Here
It
it is.
is gorgeous. You did a fabulous job.
Thank you so much.
So beautiful.
Thank
So
you.
once again, you can buy your books on Amazon and on your website, right?
So Amazon and Barnes and Noble, my website will have signed copies for a limited time. It'll also probably be a limited quantity that'll be going live either end of June or in July. But again, just because I'll be fulfilling them myself and I work full time and stuff like that, I'll be limiting the quantity. So if you end up wanting a signed copy, you can grab them from my website. But I would suggest signing up to the newsletter because the newsletter will get the first info on when that shop goes live.
Nice. Okay. So thank you so much for spending your evening with me and having,
Thank you.
like, I really had fun and a lot of
Me too.
relatable moments, I think, to be able to chat with you because you're so animated. I just can feel your love of this. I really do.
Me
So
too.
this will be available on YouTube and all your favorite podcast channels. And I can't wait to see updates for you in the very near future. It's so exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, Tina. I had such a blast with you. And yeah, thank you for having me on.
Thanks.